Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. Anybody who subscribes to my channel will know that I am a big fan of Blackstone Fortress and I like to take every opportunity I can to speak about it. In fact, only recently I did a video which I called a deep dive, which was a very thorough look at how it played and my thoughts on it, and kind of like a big review overview type thing. I will put a link below to that video because anybody who is interested in Blackstone Fortress, that video does cover a lot of ground. It's quite a slog, but I'm quite proud of the end result. It's probably my most technically proficient video to date. But anyway, this video is kind of a follow-on to that video because I wanted to talk a little bit more about expansions, not least because Games Workshop have just announced that the new expansion, Escalation, is going up for pre-order soon. Escalation is the largest expansion to date because it's introducing new heroes and things like that, but it does on the whole look like it's going to be following a similar format to the previous smaller expansions. We have Traitor Command, this one here, and prior to Traitor Command we had the Dread Ambull, and both Traitor Command and the Dread Ambull worked in the same way. And something that I have seen quite a bit on the internet as I mooch around is people asking, are these expansions worth the money? How do they integrate with the base game? And how much of the content from the expansions can you use on a regular basis? So I thought I would do this little video and just talk about how these expansions play and how they integrate with the base game. A little bit of this may be covering ground that I've covered in my reviews of these expansions, but here we go anyway. I'm talking about Blackstone Fortress. You can't shut me up. So we're going to be looking specifically at Traitor Command here. The first thing to note about these expansions is that they continue the narrative of the base game, and the narrative of Blackstone Fortress is one of the things I absolutely love. And each new expansion is extending the story. It's it's not just fleshing out the details of the Blackstone Fortress, but it's actually fleshing out the enemy forces, their motivations, what they're up to, what the heroes are trying to do, how the events in the Blackstone Fortress are affecting those heroes, and also what the heroes have access to in order to help them in future missions. It's a very interesting concept. It's not just tagging on another mission that sits in isolation. There is a grander narrative at play, which is a lovely little factor that I don't think should be overlooked for anybody who enjoys narrative games as much as I do. But anyway, that said, each expansion is a self-contained mission. So in this box, you get all of the core components you need to play this mission. I'm going to put the box to one side. So when you're playing the mission from the base game, you will use the base game exploration deck. This is not the base game exploration deck, this is the exploration deck for Traitor Command. And you will also use a discovery deck from the base game. Those decks are not used when you play an expansion. As you can see, an expansion comes with its own exploration deck and its own discovery deck. And that's because it's a very narrative driven game. So the exploration events that you're going to meet are keyed into the narrative of this particular expansion. In this case, the Traitor Command expansion, you have these traitor guards that are trying to achieve a nefarious goal that I won't go into, and you are attempting to collect certain items that you can then use to stop them. That's incredibly vague, but I don't want to ruin anything story-wise. But the exploration cards that you uncover along the way are keyed towards that a little bit more. And similarly, the discovery cards are unique to the mission that you are going on, so you won't use the discovery cards or the exploration cards from the base game whilst you are playing the expansion. Furthermore, of course, the expansion introduces some new enemies. In fact, it introduces a Chaos Ogryn and it introduces a Traitor Commissar. So you get some new encounter cards. Now, the way these encounter cards work is they are used in conjunction with some of the encounter cards from the base game. So you will make a unique deck of encounter cards using things like Traitor Guardsman, and you keep these two encounter cards separate. And when you draw combat cards from this exploration deck, sometimes you will be told to draw from these cards, and sometimes you will draw from your regular encounter cards, and that's how they incorporate these boss type enemies, the Chaos Ogryn and the Commissar. So you play the game as you normally would, leaving Precipice, going onto the Blackstone Fortress, using this exploration deck here, and you're searching for these particular items that you need. Once you've acquired a certain number of them, you can attempt to tackle a final level, which is similar to the strongholds that you get in the base game. It comes in its own little snazzy thing here called the Heart of Corruption. I'm not going to show it to you because, again, spoilers. The difference is once you tackle the Heart of Corruption, you don't use the exploration cards from here anymore. You use the exploration cards from the base game, and that's because once you're attacking the stronghold, or once you're attacking the final mission, you don't need events that are keyed towards finding those items anymore, if that makes sense. So when you're actually in the run-up to your final confrontation, you need cards that will drive that narrative. Once you're actually in the final stage, you can go for those slightly more generic exploration cards that came with the base game. And then, if you complete the Heart of Corruption, you have won the expansion. Hurrah! It's a single mission, and again, that's something that some people are going to be concerned about in terms of the value, because these are not cheap expansions. But if you complete the mission, you do get access to this envelope, and the base game had one of these, and all of the expansions so far have had one as well. And it's a secret what is inside. I haven't completed this expansion yet, so I don't know what's inside either. But it's going to be something that you get to keep and you have access to when you play future games. So when you go back to playing the base game, or when you get a new expansion, you have a permanent achievement. You've unlocked an achievement that you will have access to forevermore, and that's quite interesting. It's not quite legacy, but it's legacy-ish, because it is a sealed envelope, and once it's opened, it's part of your storyline. It becomes part of your narrative. It's a cool little feature. It's like a little bonus that you get for staying with the narrative and getting each expansion as it comes out. But then you've completed the mission. So at that point, is all this stuff irrelevant? Well, not quite. Some of this stuff can then be taken and put back into your base game. Because when you're playing with the base game, there are two types of way you can play. You can obviously play the narrative mission that comes in the base game, which is the search for the hidden vault, or you can play one-off dungeon dives. There are rules in the base game which explains how you can create a one-off dungeon plunge, where you basically set a difficulty level of trying to get a certain number of clues and a certain amount of archaeotech, and then you go into the dungeon as a single expedition, and you just push and push and push and try and achieve that goal. And if the expedition ends before you've achieved the goal, you fail. And if you manage to achieve the goal, then you end the expedition at that point and you have won. So there is this single one-off dungeon plunge option if you don't want to play for a narrative game. So there are two ways you can play the base game, and a lot of the content from the expansions can be used in those styles of gameplay. First and foremost, the Discovery deck is not used. The Discovery deck has purple icons, because every expansion has a specific icon which appears on the cards to allow you to sort those cards out for future use. If the icon is black, it means you can use it in conjunction with the base game once you have completed the expansion. Don't mix the cards straight in with your base game. If you do that, you're going to have trouble playing the expansion. The concept is you play the expansion as a standalone product, and only once you've completed it and won that sealed envelope do you integrate the cards back into your base game. And of course, if at some point down the line you want to play the Traitor Command expansion again, or the Dread Ambull expansion again, these symbols do make it easier to sift the cards out to do it again. But again, it's more along the lines of a kind of legacy system. It doesn't involve ripping up cards and putting stickers on things, but as you play the expansions, you get to then add cards back into your base game, and your base game changes and it evolves, like the Blackstone Fortress itself. Over time, it changes, it evolves, you incorporate things that you've done, your successes, your victories, where you've gone wrong. And also, of course, as heroes die, you lose access to those heroes forever until you reset and start again. So there is a certain amount of legacy style continuity through the use of these expansions. So these particular ones, they all have the purple icon, so you don't use any of these discovery decks. That's fine, because the discovery deck in the base game is massive anyway. You do get to use some of the exploration cards. I don't really want to spoil these very much, but you can see we have black symbols, and in fact for this particular expansion there is only one card that has the purple icon. So for all of the rest of the cards, you can add those in to your base game exploration deck, and you can use those when you do the quest for the Hidden Vault, and you can use those when you do a standalone expedition one-off dungeon plunge. Of course, you also have the option of adding the villains from the expansion into the base game, in this case the Ogrin and the Commissar. And this is one thing that they didn't quite work the integration in as well as I would have liked. In this particular case, if you play narratively, if you're playing the search for the Hidden Vault, and you want to include the Commissar and the Ogrin, you basically take these two encounter cards and you just add them to your encounter deck, and you add it in at any point you want, maybe from the start of the game or from whatever point you're at in the game. You just add them into your encounter deck, and then from that point on you can meet them. What I would have liked is the inclusion of a legacy card that had this type of villain on it, that if you've watched my deep dive or you've seen any of the other content regarding Blackstone Fortress, you know that when you play the main game, when you play the Hidden Vault expedition, every time you return to Precipice, you draw a legacy card, and the legacy card will change how the Blackstone Fortress acts, and quite often it will introduce a new type of enemy. There are 4 cards that are literally just timers. They say nothing happens, but you're a bit closer to defeat, because if you ever run out of legacy cards and have to draw another one, it's game over. It would have been nice to have had a legacy card for the enemies here, and it just to say in the rules, take out one of those timer cards and replace it with the Chaos Ogrin and Commissar card, and then when you're playing your narrative game, when you draw that legacy card, then you add these encounter cards to your deck. That just would have been an extra little bit of integration to make that a little bit smoother. However, that isn't there. So you can, if you want to, just basically add these encounter cards to your encounter deck whenever you feel like it. Whenever you think you want a tougher challenge, you want the risk of running into some bigger bad guys, things like that. If you're playing a single dungeon plunge, you use all the encounter cards you have anyway. So a single one-off dungeon plunge, you can meet Obsidious Mallex, your Dreaded Ambull, a Chaos Ogrin, and it can all kick off quite brutally. So yes, you can use that in that sense as well. So it's very easy to integrate the enemies into your games as well. Finally, there is this Eye of Vect spaceship. Now, when you play Traitor Command, you have to have this ship as one of your 4 ship options. So if there's a space on Precipice, then you have to have this. If you pick a selection of heroes that all have a spaceship each, you have to replace one of their spaceships with the Eye of Vect. The Eye of Vect basically allows you to gain a bonus during the game, but it comes at a cost, and you have to pay the cost every time you return to Precipice, or you take sort of permanent wounds that will hamper your chances of success later on. It's a cool little mechanism. There are no official rules for integrating this into your one-off dungeon plunges or your quest for the Hidden Vault. However, it's obviously very easy to do. You basically just say, well, let's play with the Eye of Vect, and then you take out one of the spaceships you would normally have and you drop in the Eye of Vect instead. There's no reason you can't do it. It's a balanced mechanism. It's quite powerful, but in being powerful, it also it has a cost associated with it. You wouldn't really want to use it in one-shot dungeon plunges, because in a one-shot dungeon plunge you never return to Precipice, and therefore you would never have to pay the cost of using this ability. So you could use it, but it would be quite powerful for no perceived downside. But when you're playing the Hidden Vault, there's no reason why you can't introduce it and have it as an extra option. Something to help customize Precipice to make it the way you would like it. Now, the Dreaded Ambull didn't have a new spaceship like the Eye of Vect, but it did have a new spaceship. It was a spaceship that was actually incorporated into the narrative, the quest for the Dreaded Ambull. It was the Set 7 spacecraft, which was actually set up like this on its under construction side and was sort of tagged onto the Precipice board. And what I'm going to do here, I'm actually going to do a little spoiler regarding Set 7. So if you do not want to find out what Set 7 is all about, I will basically give you a little timestamp to advance to. But if you've already played Dread Ambull through to conclusion, you will know what this is about. If you want to know anyway, I'm going to spoil it. I'm going to spoil it any minute now. Right now. Still here? Right, fair warning. Spoiler alert. When you complete Dreaded Ambull, you get to open a sealed envelope, and the sealed envelope is actually a persistent effect where Set 7 becomes complete and it actually becomes a part of Precipice, and you can always choose to have it attached to Precipice, and its effect remains for every expedition from then on. And the rest of the envelope, the rest of the contents of the envelope, are items that you can actually go to Set 7 and trade for, which are mainly things that are derived from the Dreaded Ambull. So completing the Dreaded Ambull expansion actually changes Precipice itself and gives you a new permanent option to gain access to items that only last for a single expedition. They degrade. So if you don't use them, you lose them. But it's another sort of legacy concept that by completing an expansion, you develop your own personal narrative. You gain a new part of Precipice. You gain new options. You gain access to new equipment, better equipment, more interesting equipment. So the expansions themselves help to flesh out your world, flesh out your narrative. It's a very interesting concept. So all told, the expansions do add quite a lot to your game experience. They introduce an individual mission, something for you to play through, but then they introduce numerous ways to customize your game. You will get a wedge of new exploration cards that you can just add to your base exploration deck, which creates more variety when you're playing the Hidden Vault quest or when you're doing single dungeon plunges. You get new enemies, which you can introduce at any point into the Hidden Vault, and which are always a potential threat in single dungeon plunges. you get a special reward that will forever shape your future expeditions, perhaps in a major way, perhaps in a minor way. And for Traitor Command specifically, you get access to a new ship, which, if you want to, you can incorporate it into your base games. You don't have to, there's no real official way of doing it, but you can if you want to. And finally, one of the biggest things of all is it brings more storyline to the game. It fleshes out the world that you're playing in. It shapes and molds your events and things that can happen in the future. It drives the narrative forwards. So that's how you integrate the expansions into your base game. Whether that is value enough for you is entirely a personal thing. For me, I think having a cool standalone mission and then the option to integrate a lot of those cards and enemies back into the base game and to evolve the narrative and to have these persistent effects at the end of the expansions that do shape future games, I think that makes it all worthwhile to me. And I am very much looking forward to receiving Escalation. But that's for another video. Thank you very much for watching as always. If you have liked this video, please consider liking and subscribe if you don't already subscribe. And hopefully I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.